What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you haven't yet, please make sure to subscribe below. I would greatly appreciate that as well. But let's jump in right away. We do have one piece of news from Monday, and that is that the Packers are actually losing one of their coaches. They are losing Michael Spurlock, who is taking on a wide receiver coach position at the University of Western Kentucky. If you're wondering, Michael Spurlock, who is that? Well, Michael Spurlock was one of the assistants that was brought in for Rich Bisaccia to help try and get this special teams turned around. His technical title was the Special Teams Quality Control Coach. So they will have to potentially fill that position and bring in another assistant for Rich Bisaccia. He wasn't the main special teams assistant, but he was one of the key members of that staff that was, again, tasked with turning around that group. I'm sure helping Keyshawn Nixon and company and, just not be basically the abysmal special teams that we've come to come accustomed to, I guess, for lack of a better term, over the last, 3 decades or so. So certainly that is a loss. Who knows exactly the impact that Michael Spurlock had on that special teams, but for special teams that you want to keep as much continuity together going into year 2 of this Rich Bisaccia system, it's a little bit of a bummer, but hopefully they can find a replacement and find somebody who's going to be able to take that spot and perform it at a very high level. All right, let's get into our main topic for today, though, and that is really how to win in 2023. And what I mean by this is Judy Battista just did some reporting and had some great tweets from the NFL's competition committee meetings. And a couple key notes here that I took away from all of the reports that she had done. The first is that scoring was down to 43.8 points per game this past season, which was its lowest total in 5 years. So scoring has been down. And just for comparison's sake, in 2020, it was 49.6 points, so almost a touchdown higher just in 2020 than what it was in 2022. One of the other key takeaways is that there are fewer deep passes being thrown. And those two things may seem not totally related, but one of the reasons that I wanted to go over those statistics, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today, is because there has been a fairly significant trend in the NFL over the past, I would say, 3-ish seasons, and that is the rise of the too high safeties and teams doing anything and everything in their power to not bring that second, or one of those safeties, I should say, down in the box and have only one safety up high. Because as you know, if you have one safety, center of the field, rangy safety, if you have that, you are susceptible to deep balls on the outside, and a good quarterback can manipulate that safety to go to one side and then throw to the other. And then wide receivers have the ability to win those one-on-one matchups on the outside. And that's ultimately how you get usually some of those huge explosive plays down the field. If there's 2 safeties deep, it's a lot harder to do that, right? You can't look a safety away, which means that even if the wide receiver wins on the outside and you're throwing deep down the field, there's a safety covering that half of the field. And I should point out here, just because they line up in 2 high safeties doesn't mean they're in a cover 2, doesn't mean that both safeties are responsible for half the field. They could be in a cover 4. They could do a variety of different things outside, of that 2 high safety look. But what we're seeing is an overarching general philosophy by NFL defenses, mostly keeping 2 safeties deep, but more importantly, doing everything in their power to not give up big explosive plays. That has been the name of the game on defense for, again, a few seasons now. And you might say, well, Andy, it's always been the goal to not give up explosives. Yes, to some point that's true, but teams had a different set of priorities for a while. Their biggest thing is, you got to stop the run. You got to stop the run. You got to stop the run. Now teams are shifting and saying, you can run the ball. We don't care. We just want to make sure we're not giving you 40-yard plays, 50-yard plays, 60-yard plays, or these shot plays that are going for explosive touchdowns. If we can limit you and not have you get those big explosive plays, what does that mean? It means that the team that you're facing is going to have to go 15 plays, 80-yard drives. And I've talked about this on numerous occasions, and I know people are frustrated with the Mike Pettin style of doing this. People are frustrated with the Joe Barry style of doing this. But this is the defense that is extremely in vogue throughout the NFL. And the goal of it is to make teams go 15 plays, 80 yards, and actually be successful when they get down there in the red zone. You're betting that the opposing team is going to screw something up along the way. Whether they throw an interception, whether they have a fumble, whether they have a sack on a key down, or a sack that sets them back to 2nd and 18 and they just can't make up the yardage in a couple of plays, a holding penalty, a false start, whatever it is, that they are going to screw something up on the way to that 15-play, 80-yard drive. And even if they score, even if they do get the touchdown, right? And you can't hold them out of the end zone, you can't hold them to a field goal, even if they score, what you're betting is that they can't do it 4 or 5 times in a game. And if you could maybe even limit them to 2 long touchdown drives and maybe a couple field goal drives, you're at about your 20 points per game. And you're going to have a real opportunity to win that football game if you're limiting teams offensively. And if now all of a sudden those drives end up in field goals instead of touchdowns, now you're even better. And now maybe it's a touchdown and 3 field goal drives, and now you're at 16 points instead of the 20 plus. So opposing defenses are betting that you can't consistently go 80 yards, 80 yards, 80 yards and score touchdowns. Maybe you get down there, but the defense thinks that they can hold you in the red zone and hold you to field goals or field goal attempts, which may or may not be made. So that's the overarching philosophy that teams are playing with. And it is, like I said, very in vogue. Green Bay is not the only team that has tried this. There have been a lot of teams that have been extremely successful in running this style of defense. And until offenses catch up to it, until we see offenses jump back up and make a jump in scoring again, this is going to be the consistent defenses that teams are employing week after week after week, and you're going to have to figure out a way to beat it. Now, the NFL is constantly cyclical, and you're going to go in times where it's a massive passing league, and then the defenses will adjust, and they'll get huge pass defenses set up, and then it'll go back to a running league, and then it'll go to a passing league, it'll go to a running league, and you'll go back and forth. And what I think is going to happen is and we've already seen it, right? To some extent, especially with Philly and San Francisco this past season, these teams that can consistently run the ball and pound the ball down your throat have a better opportunity. And we've seen it even with quarterbacks that have that scrambling ability as well. A guy like Jalen Hurts who can run the football and get those safeties down in the box. Or if they're so stubborn that they're going to keep those 2 safeties back no matter what, we can keep getting 4 yards on the ground, 5 yards on the ground, 6 yards on the ground, and we'll keep pounding the ball right down your throat. So we're already starting to see this swing back of teams that now can power run the football against these light boxes with 2 safeties deep. And what they're desperately trying to do is get those safeties to come down in the box. Or even better, if you're having success running the ball, just hope that they keep their 2 safeties deep, because at that point, you don't really mind all that much. So like anything, just because that is the best system to play right now in the NFL doesn't mean you can just do it with any personnel. You have to have the right personnel to execute and play 2 safety high defense and make it so that the opposing team isn't going to be able to put together those 15-play, 80-yard drives. And the keys to that, and we'll start with defense first and what Green Bay needs to do to make it so that they can be successful running this style of defense. And then we'll look at the offensive side and say, what does the offense need to do to beat this style of defense? So on the defensive side, you have to have the ability to hold up against a run. If you don't have the run defense to hold up with a light box, because you're usually playing 3 corners, like nickel is the starting defense, right? So you're usually having 3 corners, and you have 2 safeties that are deep down the field and not coming up to support the run until after the play is started. If that's the case, you've got usually a 4-man front and 2 linebackers. You've got 6 guys to try and stop the run. All right, just simple math is they've got 5 offensive linemen, usually a tight end that they are going to have to block those 6 guys. You have a quarterback that you have to account for on bootlegs and rollouts and play action. And you have a running back that you have to account for. So the numbers are in the favor of the offense running the football in that situation. But if defenses feel like they can stop you with just those 6 guys, they're going to keep doing it over and over and over and over. So that means you have to have 2 guys along the edge that can set an aggressive edge and make sure that teams can't run to the outside on you. And you have to have guys on the inside that can not only eat space, but eat double teams and are very consistent and not getting pushed off the line of scrimmage and having these huge gaping holes. More importantly, you have to have safeties on the back end who can race up and fill those gaps, fill those holes, and be consistent tackling on the back end. And that's really number 2 on my list is your second level defenders, your linebackers, your corners, your safeties. If you're going to play this style of defense, you have to be a very good tackling team. Because when I talked about before about what we've seen in the NFL from a statistical standpoint is fewer deep shots down the field, again, that's because the safeties are deep, right? So how are teams going to get explosive plays against you? They're going to run the football and they're going to make people miss, or they're going to get it to a wide receiver in space, like your Tyreek Hills or your wide receivers who can make a ton of people miss in the open field, or a tight end, a Travis Kelce that can make people miss in the open field. They're going to get it to those players and let them do the heavy lifting, the Deebo Samuels, etc., the AJ Browns. You know the players. They're going to get it to those players in space, and they're just going to make things happen. So it's imperative that you have defenders on the back end that can come up, and if they complete a 5 or 6 yard pass, that you're stopping it for 5 or 6 yards, and it doesn't have the ability to turn into a 40, 45, 50 yard play. Because if their run after the catch or their ability to run the football all of a sudden results in a lot of explosive plays, it doesn't matter that they're not completing deep passes on you. They're having the same effect. They're still getting those explosives. So it is so important that your linebackers, your corners, your safeties are sound tacklers and can come up and fill gaps, and they're engaged in the run game, because if they're not, you're not going to be able to run this system at an effective level. And then last but not least, you do need some ability for your linebackers specifically to cover up the middle of the field from a coverage standpoint. If you don't have the foot speed at linebacker and you don't have the tackling ability at linebacker, you're going to be in a tough situation. Because, and again, I want to be clear here, just because they're playing 2 high safeties doesn't mean they're in cover 2, but you have seen a lot of cover 2. And one of the big things that you can beat a cover 2 with is a tight end up the seam. So you've got to make sure that you've got linebackers that can cover those tight ends up the seam. So if they are or if you do want to play cover 2, you're not giving up big explosives to opposing teams' tight end. So how does Green Bay fit into that? Again, stopping the run and holding up in the run game with the defensive line, tackling on the second level, and covering the seam in the middle of the field. Well, let's start with the run. Per Pro Football Focus, it's not going to surprise anyone, the Packers were the 7th worst run defense team in the NFL based on their grades. Meanwhile, if you look at the yards per carry, they allowed 5.0 yards per carry last year, which was 5th worst in the NFL. So that is red flag number 1. Because if you're allowing 5 yards per carry, what are you going to have to do? In big situations, in big moments, you're going to have to start dropping that safety into the box. And now the entire integrity of the system that you want to run is completely out the window. Now you can't run what everyone else wants to run by keeping your 2 safeties deep. So this goes back to get Kenny help, and maybe we can see that legitimate jump from TJ Slayton. Maybe we can see that legitimate jump from Devontae Wyatt, and those 2 can be the guys that give Kenny legitimate help. Maybe we can see Rashawn Gary come back healthy and set an aggressive edge on one side, and Preston can continue to play the edge well on the other side. And Kingsley Enagbare puts on some functional strength and does a better job of setting the edge next year, and all of a sudden your defensive front looks better. But whatever the case may be, you have to be better than you were a season ago. Because once again, if you're allowing 5 yards per carry, nothing else really matters, right? Because either now you're putting way too much stress on your safeties, or that one of those safeties is just going to have to drop in the box, because you can't be successful when the opposing team is running for 5 yards in every carry. Now, PFF did have them as the 13th best tackling team. To be fair, I just don't buy it. I don't feel like Green Bay was the 13th best tackling team. Even if they were, that's about middle of the road. So they're okay at it. You can't convince me, and feel free to disagree with me, because obviously the stats are the stats. I don't feel like this is a middle of the pack tackling team. Because when I look at this team, I look at a secondary where Jaire goes in spurts. Like, there'll be times where you see him make a play, but overall I do think he has a little bit of memory of his bum shoulder, or his shoulder getting hurt, and just isn't quite as aggressive as he used to be. Eric Stokes did not want to get involved in the run game at all. Darnell Savage did not want to get involved in the run game. He was a little bit better after he got benched and playing in the slot, but coming up from safety, it was not good enough. Adrian Amos wasn't a willingness issue. It just was a foot speed issue. Him losing the step was an issue. Quay and Campbell were pretty good in that regard. Campbell wasn't as good last year as he was in 2021, but overall, like there's some okay tackling there, but it's not good enough. Rasul is a fine tackler, but you just have too many guys. When you have a Savage, a Jair, and a Stokes in your secondary, and an Amos that, again, the foot speed was an issue. Not taking good angles was an issue in the secondary as a whole. I just don't see this as a defense that is a sound tackling team. And it's something, even if they're 13th, it just needs to be better. There's no way around it. And then, you look at the coverage in the middle of the field. This is one thing that I think Green Bay is actually good enough here. I do think Quay and Campbell's strength this past season at linebacker was their coverage ability. I do think their ability to cover the middle of the field, cover the seam, and use their speed to get sideline to sideline, I do think that's one of the strengths of this team and of the linebackers as a whole. So I do think they can do that. So defensively, as we look at this, what do they need? They need more physicality up front. They need to get Kenny a little bit more help, and that can come internal. That can just be Slayton and Wyatt being a lot better. That can be a part of that. That can be Gary coming back from injury and wreaking havoc on the outside again and setting a very aggressive edge. Those are things that can be better just inherently. But you probably still want to give yourself a little bit more depth, a little bit more physicality, because you can't allow 5.0 yards per carry and still expect to be successful and run this defense that everyone wants to run. Next is that your safeties just have to be better coming up and tackling and making sure that they're in the right spot at the right time and being aggressive when coming down and filling gaps. Because if not, you're going to have a lack of gap integrity. You're not going to have the ability to not give up explosive plays in the running game. And it just needs to be better. So this is a huge offseason for safety for Green Bay, because with Darnell Savage, first of all, is he back? I think he is, based on his guaranteed contract, unless you can find a trade for him. And if he is he playing slot or is he playing safety? I would assume safety based on the depth of the position right now. But Amos probably gone. They're going to need to rebuild that safety group. And in doing so, they need to find sound tacklers, because if not, that makes it so that it's really, really difficult to play this defense, because Jair's not going anywhere. Stokes isn't going anywhere. Rasul's a fine tackler already, but you're going to need a little bit more physicality, and that is going to have to come from the safety position and just better tackling. So that's something that they're going to have to get better at as well. All right, so how do you get better on the offensive side of the ball? We just covered defense and what the defense needs to do better, including the physicality up front, the tackling on the back end. We think they can cover the middle of the field all right, but those are going to be the important steps. And it's basically just the opposite on the offensive side of the ball. They need the ability to run the ball consistently to get that safety to come down and hit some of those play action shots down the field. You need the ability to run after contact, either in the running game or just yards after catch in the passing game. And you need the ability for the tight end to work the middle of the field and maybe actually get some yards after the catch. So how did Green Bay do last year in these categories? Well, in yards per carry, they were 12th. In total rushing yards, they were 15th. So they were middle of the pack in running the football. I think we would all be willing to say a lot of times they just took themselves out of running the football. They just kept throwing the ball even when there were opportunities to run. And Matt LaFleur just needs to do a much better job of sticking with the running game and making sure that Aaron Jones is actually getting the football. We can't have another season of a handful of games where Matt LaFleur says, yeah, I got to do a better job of getting Aaron the ball. That cannot happen. He has to be a focal point of this offense. And you got to make sure you're running the football, especially when these defenses are so hell-bent on playing two safeties deep. However, all that being said, they were 12th in yards per carry, 15th in total rushing yards. Those are fine. They're not good enough, but they're fine. But here's the big issue. They had one rush all season long of 40-plus yards. They had 10 runs only of 20-plus yards. So not even one run a game where you're going to get a 20-plus yard run or anything like that. And if you can't hit explosives in the running game, teams just aren't going to care. I go back to the initial philosophy of this. They're doing everything in their power to not give up explosive plays. So if they get a 20-yard run like once every 2 games, basically, the defense will tip their cap and say, all right, we gave up one 20-yard run. All right, the rest of the game will probably be fine. And even if they get a bigger one than that, they had one rush over 40 yards all season long. No rushes over 50 yards. They're not hitting explosives in the running game. So even if they're an average rushing team, if you're not hitting explosives out of it, the opposing defenses aren't going to care, and they're going to say, yeah, you can do that. That's fine. You're not going to beat us with that. We'll keep our 2 safeties deep to make sure you don't beat us with explosive plays down the field because you're not hitting explosives in the running game. So it is going to be extremely important that Green Bay does a better job of hitting explosives in the running game, or teams just aren't going to care, and they'll continue to keep 6 guys in the box. Next up is yards after catch. This will be of no surprise to you. The 4 teams in the finals last year were all in the top 8 in yards after catch. The Chiefs, who won the Super Bowl, were number 1. The Bengals, the Eagles, 49ers, all of them were in the top 8. If you're going to play 2 safeties deep, you have to have guys that can just get the ball in their hands and be special. And these are 4 teams, the 4 final teams were all good at yards after the catch. And you don't have to look very far why, right? The Chiefs have a Travis Kelce and a bunch of run after the catch guys. Get Kadarius Toney. MVS has the speed. Mecole Hardman. All of those guys. They're run after the catch guys. The Cincinnati Bengals have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. The Philadelphia Eagles have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and even like guys like Dallas Goedert, right? The 49ers, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk. We can go on. Christian McCaffrey. Like, these are run after catch guys. This is now a run after catch playmaker league. If you don't have playmakers, if you don't have guys that can make special things happen in the open field, it's going to be very hard to play offense because, once again, you're not going to be able to hit those deep shots down the field with any level of consistency. So you better have guys that can make that happen on their own. Now, the good news is the Packers were surprisingly 11th in yards after catch last year. And that's pretty good. Now, part of that is because they did a lot of it. There was a lot of little screens to the outside that picked up certain yardage and things like that. So they were more of like a bulk team when it came to yards after the catch. But I think we all know that Green Bay needs to have more playmakers in their offense. Because while a lot of these guys are good players, your Allen Lazards, your Randall Cobbs, your Mercedes Lewis, your Robert Tonyan, your A.J. Dillon, we can go on. They're just not playmaker threats that are going to beat you with speed or just moves in the open field. That's not what they do well. They do a lot of things well. Those are all good football players, but they're not playmakers. Really, your 2 playmakers were Christian Watson and Aaron Jones. Those are your 2 guys. And you didn't have much else. And Christian Watson didn't play a ton of the season. It's not a surprise that once they got Christian Watson playing at a high level, guess what came easier? Offense, explosive plays. Because they had that dude, they had that guy. It is so important, and it's more important that they get even more of that type of player because of the way defenses are playing. And if we look at the longest rush of the year last year, again, I mentioned that it wasn't over 50 yards. The one rush over 40 yards all year was by Christian Watson. It was by Christian Watson. Aaron Jones, longest rush of the year, 36 yards. A.J. Dillon, longest rush of the year, 27 yards. That's not playmaking. You have to hit explosives. You have to hit 40, 50-yard runs. So that's not an Aaron Jones fault, by the way. That is, everything needs to be more consistent. The blocking needs to be better up front. But if you don't hit consistent explosive plays in the running game, you're not going to get defenses to come out of their shell. And if you look at a receiving standpoint, right? The Packers only had 2 players have receptions over 50 yards all season long. Christian Watson, 63 yards, and then Sammy Watkins, 55, which was not something he could do consistently, and he's gone. So the only rush over 40 yards all year, Christian Watson. The only reception over 50 yards all year from a player that's still on the roster, Christian Watson. He's that guy right now. You need more of those guys. So yeah, on offense, if you need to continue to have long drives, if you need to consistently have these long, drawn out, brutal offensive drives, 17 plays, 85 yards, 15 plays, 80 yards, 16 plays, 84 yards, etc., etc., etc. It is going to be tough, and it is going to ultimately limit your upside when it comes to being a high-scoring offense. So they need more playmakers. They need more run after the catch ability. They need to be more consistent blocking up front for Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. And they do need a tight end who can also work over the middle of the field. Green Bay has nobody at the tight end position that can actually do that right now. So offense is a major work in progress when it comes to attacking these type of defenses. You want to know why Green Bay struggled and it looked like this offense was so behind the 8 ball last year and could just never get it going. It's in large part because there was none of these things that they ultimately did super well. They couldn't hit explosives. Christian Watson finally could, and that's when the offense took off a little bit, but he was kind of the only guy, and the running game wasn't consistent enough for generating explosives either. It's just going to make it really, really difficult to continue to put up huge drives and actually get touchdowns, which brings me to my last point for both offense and defense, is that when you do get these explosives, let's say they don't end in a touchdown, or you do get the 15-play, 80-yard drives, what does that make so much more important? Red zone offense and red zone defense. Red zone defense was okay for Green Bay. We know red zone offense was abysmal. That is something that this team is going to have to work on excessively. And I will say, I know a lot of this, whether it's better tackling safeties, more playmakers on offense, a better run defense up front on defense, a better offensive line. It just goes to the fact of like, oh, what fixes that? Oh, better players. Like, of course, right? Get good players and good things are going to happen. But this tells you where you need to focus your skill set right now. You need to have guys that can have run after the catch ability, the A.J. Browns, the Deebo Samuels, the Christian McCaffreys, the George Kittles, the Travis Kelce's. You know the guys. You need players like that. Christian Watson is one of those. That's a really good thing they have one of them. You need to have consistent offensive line play up front so that you can consistently run the football. You have to have beef up front on defense so you can stop the run game. And you have to have guys who can tackle on defense at safety. And there is a difference. If you're going to play a lot of man coverage with your safeties, that is a different skill set. If you're going to play a lot of single high safety, that's a different skill set. If you have two safeties that are playing each half of the field or cover 2, cover 4, whatever it is, their actual coverage skill, especially like man-to-man coverage skill, is less important. What becomes a lot more important is their ability to come up and make plays in the run game and make sure that everybody that comes in their vicinity, they can tackle with consistency. So that gives you an idea of what type of player you need to target at the safety position as well. Now, there's good news here. The good news is Aaron Jones is back. Watson looks legit and can be a legitimate playmaker and all those, the type of player that we're talking about that Green Bay needs. Christian Watson is that dude. And if you can get a whole season out of him, you should see the offense have a lot more success. This looks like a great tight end class in the draft that hopefully Green Bay can get a guy that's going to help them at tight end. And the hope is that you have Elton Jenkins and David Bakhtiari that can help you on that offensive line and be more productive in the red zone and be more consistent running the football with Aaron Jones and maybe get some more of those explosives, which is going to make some of those safeties come up, which is going to give Aaron Rodgers more passing lanes down the field. And on defense, TJ Slayton and Devontae Wyatt hopefully can take a step this year. Hopefully Rashawn Gary is back at full health at some point and can be a menace on the edge on defense as well. So there's a lot of things that can look up and look positive, but they are going to need to have better tackling safeties, better run defense, more explosive plays in the run game, more playmaking in the pass game, and they're going to need to find a tight end who can work the middle of the field a little bit more. If they can do those things, they can work this Joe Barry defense with the 2 high safeties and have it be extremely successful like we're seeing throughout the rest of the league. And on offense, if you can do these things, a lot of the things that the Kansas City Chiefs and the Cincinnati Bengals and the Philadelphia Eagles and the San Francisco 49ers are doing on offense, if you can do some of those things, you're going to be a lot more successful and put yourself in a position to get those teams either out of 2 high safeties or gladly have them in 2 high because you're going to be able to run the football or get yards after the catch in the passing game, which you are more than happy to take over and over and over again. This is a new league. It is a different way to play right now on offense and defense. Green Bay has to adapt and they have to get the right players who are going to fit those schemes, or they can run those schemes as much as they want and it's just not going to work because they don't have the right players to do it. A major offseason for Green Bay as they look to attack these positions and make sure they're put in a better position to succeed in 2023. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be right back here tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.